And turning your Bibles to Genesis chapter 28, we will be considering the last half of that chapter. I guess it's a little bit more than half, but verses 10 through 22. Well said, Jared? Yeah, good. We good, Scott? Okay. Uh-oh. Why don't we pray? Heavenly Father, we've come now to sit under your word, to hear it read. This is a very significant and important portion of Scripture, certainly for Jacob, but for us as well. And it's my desire that we would take from it today all that we ought to, all the lessons that are here, that the gravity of the scene and what unfolds would weigh upon us, and we would walk in the light of the things we see today. And so, to that end, we pray for your help in unfolding your word and making it plain to us, and in granting to us hearts wide open to your word and minds sharp and discerning concerning your truth. We ask for this in the name of Christ. Amen. Let's read then Genesis 28, verses 10 through 22. Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran, and he came to a certain place and stayed there that night, because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. So, early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on the top of it. He called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of the city was Luz at the first. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, If God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone, which I have set up for a pillar, shall be God's house. and of all that you give me, I will give a full tenth to you. All right. The title of the message today is God conscripts Jacob, and Jacob responds. God conscripts Jacob. We are familiar, I hope, with that term. Some of you kids may not know it. When you are conscripted, usually we think of it as you're being conscripted into an army. So you can enlist, right? You can go of your own accord and say, I'm going to enlist, I'm going to sign my name, and I agree that I will serve in this military and do as I'm told, when I'm told, how I'm told, why I'm told, until this time period runs out, or if they decide to extend it until they decide they're done extending it. Pretty much is how this works when you enlist. When you are conscripted, is just the opposite. It's when they come to you and they just take you and say, this is what you will do. This is what's going to happen. And there is a sense in which God conscripts Jacob here. He just comes to Jacob and says, this is what I'm going to do with you. And Jacob responds. And so this is what we mean. God conscripts Jacob, and Jacob responds. Now also in this passage, by way of brief introduction, let me say this. We have just read the first dream narrative in the entire Bible. You know, we're familiar with, there are times when God appears to people in dreams, or someone has a dream, like later we read about Joseph having dreams, and he interprets the dreams of others and these sorts of things. Sometimes people just have dreams. We know what dreams are. We have dreams, and very often we wouldn't say God's the one behind it, but God does at times appear to people and communicate to people in their dreams. I know of a number of Christians who have had dreams that there's no other way to explain it. They've known at the end of the dream this was from God. There's just a sense. It's not a wondering, I wonder if maybe this was from God. They just know God declared something to them in the dream and it came to pass. Or the knowledge they gained in the dream was in fact accurate, true, real knowledge. This happens. God does this. We're told it's something He will regularly do, in fact, in this new covenant era, that God will speak to us in dreams. I don't say any of that so that we begin to, try to find God underneath every rock in our dreams and this kind of thing. I don't mean anything like that. I just mean that it happens. And this is the first instance in which we're told in the Bible that it specifically happened. We've been told of other visions in the Scriptures so far. And sometimes visions happen in dreams, but not always. Those other visions may have been dreams. But this one is the first time ever we're told explicitly that God appeared to someone in a dream. This is an absolutely life-changing event for Jacob. There are a number of applications which we can make as a result of reading the story. Those applications can be made in several areas, and I want to just list them for you. We will end with this as well, but number one, our confidence in God. Number two, worship. 3, personal commitment. And 4, evangelism. Confidence in God, worship, commitment, and evangelism. Just 4 areas where I think this account speaks to us, and I think has quite a bit to say, at least in terms of the way things look for Jacob. As far as an introduction goes, I think that's about as much as I have, as far as I want to take things for now. So let's just step back from the story for a moment and remember the context. We read in verse 10, Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran. And we should just stop and try to remember, why is this happening? Right? Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran. Well, why was he in Beersheba to begin with? Well, he was in Beersheba because that's where he had been living, along with his brother Esau, who generally had been living in that area, and his father and his mother, who had pitched their tents there at Beersheba, had been there and settled there for some time outside the small town that would have been there. And he is leaving. He left Beersheba and went toward Haran. Well, why is he going to Haran? Well, that is the land where his mother is from, where his family originally was from, right, from Haran. And they have been going back there to get wives. Abraham sent his servant to go get a wife, namely Rebekah. And then Rebekah has pleaded with Isaac to send Jacob back there again to get a bride. Isaac gave specific instructions to Jacob about where to go and get this bride. He's to go specifically to his uncle's house and get a woman to marry. Specific instructions. And so he's going to go. He's obeying his parents in this. He's 77 years old, and he's going to obey. It's quite a thing. Very old man, but he goes. Now, he left Beersheba and went toward Haran. But he's not just going to go get a wife. He's not just on an errand. Remember, he's also fleeing for his life. The reason Rebekah had heard of Esau's plan to murder his brother as soon as their father passed away, which could have been at any moment as far as they knew. We know what that's like, right? When you have an elderly relative and you just kind of say to yourself, we don't know how long they have left. Could be any time now. The doctors have told us, it was 2 years ago they gave them a month, and it's been 2 years and they're doing really well, but you just never know how long it's going to be. We know this kind of a situation. And Isaac is blind, his health is failing, he's not doing well. Jacob just deceived him and took the birthright, or the blessing that he meant to give to Esau. He stole that. Then he also has the blessing of Abraham passed down to him. And Esau is furious about what has happened. He means to murder his brother Jacob as a result. And Rebekah has gotten word of it, and she comes to Jacob and says, you need to leave, you need to run, you've got to get out of here. I can't bear to lose all of you in the same day. You've got to go. Run toward Haran, and I'll send word whenever, after Esau's cooled off and everything's fine, I'll send word, and you can come back. Let's just let this pass. Your brother's so temperamental after all, led from one thing to another all the time. This will pass too, and then you can come safely home. But of course, Rebekah, when she goes to Isaac, she doesn't just say, well, we're afraid bad things are going to happen. Isaac might, in fact, say, well, he's kind of deserved it. But she rather takes a different tack with her husband and says, hey, he needs a bride, and we cannot bear to let him take a bride from the Canaanites. Let's send him out way back to where I'm from, and back to where our families are from, back to Haran, to Paddan Aram, and let him find a bride there. And Isaac thinks this is a good idea. Timing's pretty good after all, because things aren't really looking good for Jacob right now, so let's go ahead and send him on his way. And he does. He sends him on his way. Passes on to him the blessing of Abraham, and then sends him on his way. Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran. So this is where we are. He's running for his life. He's a fugitive in a sense from his brother. He's a liar and a deceiver. It's amazing his father was willing to pass on any blessing to him at all after he just lied and deceived his father and took advantage of his blindness the way that he had. I mean, if there was a third brother, not Esau, but some other third brother, you would think that third brother would be after Jacob as well for the dishonor and the disrespect that he brought upon the family by the deceit that he just practiced upon his father. I mean, it's not just that Esau is mad at this personally, but Jacob's a scoundrel, and he deserves to be pursued. Maybe not to the death, but he certainly deserves to be punished for what he's done. But Isaac rather just passed on the blessing of Abraham to him, knowing that this was in fact the one God had chosen, as unlikely as a recipient as he may be. So we pick up the story then in verse 10. Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran. Now Beersheba is kind of in the southern, kind of southwest, but more kind of south-central area of the Promised Land. And he leaves that place and he travels. He kind of takes the King's Highway, that's called. He kind of comes in toward where Jerusalem is, and then north along this mountain ridge and this range where the common roads were. And we find him as he's traveling toward Haran, which would have been about a month journey. And on his way, he's there. And he came to we read in verse 11, a certain place, and stayed there that night. Later, we're told in the story, he renames that place Bethel. It's a few days' journey from Beersheba. So it's not as though he just left and the first night, this is where he's at. But he's a few days in. So for this month-long journey or so, we're only given a glimpse into kind of here. You know, this is it. This is 2 days. This day, after he's left, he comes to this place, and it's sunset, and so he stays there. And then later we're told at the end, whenever he, this next day, he gets up and what he does that day. We're only told about 2 days. Moses doesn't care to tell us about the journey. He wants to tell us about this event that happened on the way that's changed his whole life. He left Beersheba and went toward Haran and came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. Now, I have said multiple times that he uses this stone in a sense as a pillow, and scholars are kind of divided on that, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I've used it as an example to say he's traveling light. He doesn't have all these things with him. Elsewhere, later in Genesis, when he recounts God's faithfulness to him, he says, "When I left, I had nothing but my staff." Well, that's not true, actually, in an actual literal sense. When he says, I left with nothing but my staff, it's something like you and I would say if we said, we came here with nothing but the clothes on our back. You don't mean literally nothing but the clothes on your back. You might show up in a vehicle and say, I came nothing but the clothes on my back. And it's like, but you've got this gas-powered chariot you drove. What are you talking about? Like you have a lot. Like you could have sold that thing and had plenty of food for months. You didn't just have the clothes on your back, but we all understand what he means. And just as an example to show you that he probably doesn't just have only the staff, look at what happens in verse 18. So early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar, and he what? Just say it out. And what did he do? And he poured oil. He has oil? I mean, he's traveling with a staff and don't forget my oil. Like it's kind of, so he's got some things. Now, that is also, maybe that's the case, maybe it's not. He might have picked that oil up at the place. What do I mean? This is a bit of a theory, but I think I stand on pretty good ground to say this because of the way this language is used. Look at verse 11. He came to a certain place. It doesn't say, and he was traveling around, and he came to a certain city. Because we know later this was outside of a city. Verse 19, he called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of the city was Luz at the first. So there's a city named Luz. Outside of the city is this place that he's called Bethel now. What is this place? Well, turn with me back to Genesis chapter 12. I want you to notice something, and maybe you'll remember something I taught on this portion when we got here. Genesis chapter 12 and verse 4. So Abraham went as the Lord told him. Now Abraham, let's remember, he's coming from Haran into the Promised Land. And now here, Jacob is coming from the Promised Land back to Haran. They're traveling in opposite directions, right? And that's this way, right? It would be this way, right? So Abraham's traveling from Haran west, then he gets to the Promised Land, he heads south through the Promised Land into the Negev. Jacob is on the north end of the Negev in the Promised Land. He's traveling through the Promised Land, and then he's going to travel this way over to Haran. Now, and that's set up correctly for you guys on the map, okay, the way I just did that. Now, so, verse 4, so Abraham went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran, and Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem. To the oak, what do you mean the place? To the oak of Moreh. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. Now, you remember, I hope, we're talking about when he arrives at the place at Shechem. He doesn't arrive at Shechem. Shechem is not the place. It's the place at Shechem. Well, what is the place? Well, more than likely, it was a place of idolatry. It was a place where their pagan gods were worshipped. When it says, to the oak of Morah, we remember all the way through in the Old Testament, under the oak trees was where these false gods were worshipped. They'd go out and find a hillside somewhere. There'd be a little shrine set up under an oak. And this is exactly what we mean by the place at Shechem. This is what we're talking about. He comes to a place, to the place at Shechem. And it was there what happens. Then the Lord appeared to Abram. So it's this pagan, all these false gods are worshipped out there at this place. But Abram doesn't know that. He comes to the land and there's a place where, God called me to go to this land that He's going to show me. I get here, there's this place where they worship gods in this land, and he goes up there to see what happens. And God appears to him. To your offspring I will give this land. And so it's immediately apparent, either by the nature of the statues and the things and the ornamentation and stuff that's there at this shrine under this oak, it's apparent to Abram, either because of what he sees there or because of what his experience has been so far and continues to be with God, that this God is not worshipped with these things. And so what does he do there? So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him, because this is not who's worshipped here, but he makes an altar to God. So right there in the midst of their little high place under the oak tree where they worship their false gods, at that place, Abram sets up another altar to the true God, to his God who he's serving and who had called him here. Now, he goes on then. Let's keep reading. Verse 8. From there he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel. Now this is one of those examples, and I had mentioned it then, of a place being called a name, given a name, that historically, in this place, Abraham would not have called this place Bethel. He didn't go to a place east of Bethel. But it's to a place that all of us know, and all of Moses' readers know, is east of what they know as Bethel. Bethel hadn't been named yet, but this is just geographically where it was. Right? With Bethel on the west and Ai on the east, and there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. Near Bethel, right? Between Bethel and Ai. So there we are. Now, let's come back to Genesis chapter 28. Verse 11. And Jacob, what? He came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. You see all this talk about this? He came to a certain place. He took, well, what kind of things might you find at one of these certain places? If it's like the place that Abraham was talking about, well, you might find stones gathered around for an altar for this, an altar for that, and a shrine for, and all these. And that's what he does. He goes and takes a stone from that place. He didn't say he found a stone from the ground. He took a stone, take one of the stones of the place, some stone that someone had set up in some way, somehow, and he takes that thing and he sets it down to sleep on. He prepares it as a bed or as a pillow for his head. In some way he uses this. He sets it up so that he can lay down to rest and sleep. That's quite a thing. I mean, it's kind of desecration in a way, but this is what he does. Now, later he wakes up and he takes oil. Maybe the oil he took was some kind of in a jar that was already there at the place. That's possible. Or maybe he was carrying it with him. So, as to how lightly he's traveling, we're not exactly sure, but this is the kind of place that he finds himself in. Some religious sort of place. Now, similar to what Abraham had done, he comes to this place, and God appears to him, and then he wakes up and he builds there at that place an altar to God. Right? And he says, surely this is the gateway to heaven. This is the gate of heaven. Here is a place where God actually communicates with man, right here. So, this is the nature of the place that he's come. He came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. Now, we're told later that there's this city nearby, Luz. He doesn't go to the city. It's getting dark. He's traveling through. You know, he knows from his family's experiences that when you go in as a traveler into the city, you're just kind of welcoming trouble and inspection. People want to know this and that and the other thing. And you might be inviting people to come take things from you. You don't know what's going to happen to you. He just stays outside the city. But he needs somewhere to rest. He doesn't brought his tents with him. So where does he stay? Well, if you've got a month-long journey and you're traveling somewhere and you don't have any shelter for your head, where is it you try to stay? You try to stay in those places that are a little more sheltered, a little more secure. If you found a cave, that'd be great. If you found a place like this that maybe has some kind of covering or something over it, you probably will stay there. If you're going to move some rocks around and stuff to kind of make yourself a place to lie down, you do that. This is the way he's traveling for about a month to get to Haran. It's a few days in, and he's near this city of Luz. But so far all we know is specifically not about the city, but about where he's staying. It is one of these kinds of places where you would find these stones, and you could take a stone from one of these places, and he takes it puts it under his head and lays down in that place to sleep. He's there in it. He didn't grab it from there and drag it out more out into the field. He stayed right there within the confines of this place that he'd come to. That's kind of the setup. Now, that really is the setup in that some of you might remember that I've talked about in these narratives in the in Genesis particularly, they all start out with a certain verb form where they're kind of giving the setting. You know, we were looking at Genesis chapter 12, and in Genesis 12 it says, "Now the Lord said to Abram," and he said, you know, "go from your country," and there's all this. And then in verse 4, "So Abram went." There's one verb form at the beginning. Verses 1, 2, and 3 are all in this verb form where it's kind of setting things up. And then the main story begins, having set everything up. "So Abraham went, as the Lord had directed him." Similarly here, verses 10 and 11 are in this introductory kind of, let me tell you what you need to know about the story before I get going. And so I want to tell you a story, but before I tell you the story, let me tell you this. Jacob had left Beersheba and went toward Haran, and he came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. And taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. Now for the story, right? This is the way it works. This is the language. And if you were reading in the Hebrew, you would get that. You'd pick up on all this. It's like, okay, now the story begins. Done with the introductory material. So all you really need to know is that Jacob he's on his journey. He's come to some place, some sort of a religious type of place, meant typically for false gods, and he stayed there that night because the sun had set. Why did he choose that place? Well, because his sun was getting dark, he needs somewhere to go. He's got to have enough time to kind of set up camp, build a little fire, have something to eat maybe. If he's going to do all those things, when the sun sets, it's time to stop. And so he stops. It wasn't the best place to stop, but it was a place. And he chose this place, and what does he do? He's rearranged it some. He's not come there to worship these false gods. He's come there, he grabs a stone, he lays down to go to bed. That's what happened. That's what you need to know. That's all you really need to know. But what happens? God comes, and he dreamed, and behold. And behold isn't, the word that's used here isn't actually like, and look, it's kind of accompanied, you might say, with an outstretched neck, a raised voice, the expression, "Oh, but wait," or a pointed finger, like, "Look, and behold." So it's like, he's saying, so he comes down to sleep on this stone, and he dreamed, and behold, listen to this, listen to what happened. You're not going to believe it. Check this out. This is what we mean. "And behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it." There's three things we're to behold. So it's like he's dreaming, and I don't know what you dream about, but you don't usually dream these sorts of things. So Moses is saying, and he dreams. And listen to this. In this dream, there was this stairway or a ladder or some sort of a structure that it was based on the earth, and it went all the way into the heavens. And that's not everything. There was something even more. Check this out. Angels were ascending and descending on this structure. and there's something else. Above it was the Lord. Do you see these? And so there's three distinct things that make up kind of the things that he sees in his vision, in this dream. Three very, I think, important things, three distinct things, three unusual things for a dream. Three things God is wanting to show him in the dream and tell him in the dream. Now, we're all familiar with the phrase Jacob's ladder, and this is certainly where it comes from. And maybe it was a ladder. I don't think that's probably what it was. It's more likely like a stairway. And I'm going to call it that. I'm going to try to again and again. Probably not an actual ladder. It's actually a word that's like we just don't understand a whole lot about exactly. It's not clear in its meaning specifically, but everyone who reads this agrees that it's some sort of a ladder or a stairway. Let's just say for a moment that you had no idea what this word was and you were just reading, right? And you dreamed, and behold, there was a something set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. What would you think it was? I don't know. And then it says, and then angels of God were ascending and descending on it. I don't know, it's some kind of a ramp or a staircase or maybe a ladder or a rope, or I don't know what it is. It's some kind of way to get from, it's set up on the earth, its top reaches to the sky. Is there anywhere else in Genesis so far where we've read about something that was built on the earth and stretched up into the sky? The Tower of Babel, exactly. Right? This was done before. Men did this. They built this out of brick, this kind of a thing. So this word is usually associated with a noun that means a bank, like you have a river bank. Now, I'm not saying it's the same word. I'm saying it's usually associated by scholars and by those who understand Hebrew as being similar in some way to that word. Or a siege ramp, right? You've got your fortress walls and we can't get through, so we just build a ramp up until we can just walk up to the top of your wall and get in. Or a paved path out in the countryside, like out, there's this, you got a mountainside, we got to get there, and like we build this path. These are words that are associated with it. They're not direct meanings, they're not definitions. Other people have related it to one side of a Mesopotamian temple tower, or like a ziggurat, like the Tower of Babel. And that's not a bad idea. I think there's a lot to be said for that, simply because the only other time in Genesis where we've read anything like this is that Tower of Babel. However, I want you to understand that the purpose of the dream here is to communicate something to Jacob. Not to reveal how angels find their way into heaven and upon the earth. Like, it's not as though his eyes were open to see what has actually been taking place all this time, that these angels have been climbing up and down this ladder or this staircase, and that's what this is all about. I don't think that's what the idea is. It's rather, he's having a dream, and God's communicating things to him in the dream. Like Peter, when he had all the food there on the cloth, remember, it was let down to him. It wasn't that he was eating food that was brought down on a cloth. Like, it was, the dream was, those things that he saw were meant to teach him something. And in the same way, this tower with its base on the earth, extending to the heaven, with the angels ascending and descending upon it, and the Lord standing there, it's all meant to teach him something, to communicate something. And I'll just say as an indication that this vision or this dream he has is not meant to instruct him about how angels travel. What else are we to make of the chariots of fire later in Scripture? I mean, why aren't they climbing a staircase? Or how about, are we to say, well, this is how people get in and out of heaven. They get to this place and they climb the invisible ladder, like, Indiana Jones stepping out on the invisible walk path or whatever, right? The bridge there. Or something like that. What is in the New Testament, when the Lord ascends into heaven, He just rises up and is covered by the clouds. I mean, this is not the point of this vision at all. The point here is that to communicate to Jacob that right here, where he is right now, where he's laying, is holy ground, because God is dealing with him. He's having interactions right now between earth in heaven. This is a place of access to God and to the heavens. The point in the dream is to identify this place as one of connection and interaction between heaven and earth. Right? Here's a place where God deals with men. Jesus himself picks up on this very dream and even this very ladder or this staircase in the New Testament. Turn with me to John chapter 1, and you'll see the only place where Jesus refers to this. John chapter 1. The end of John 1, Jesus is calling Philip and Nathanael as his disciples. And let's start and read in verse 45. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." And Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Like, you're telling me you found the Messiah. And I'm saying, probably not. If you think he's from Nazareth, you're probably wrong. And Philip said to him, "Come and see." And Jesus saw Nathanael, right, the one who was doubting whether anything good can come, toward him and said to him, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit." And Nathanael said to him, "How do you know me?" Jesus answered him, "Well, before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you." And Nathanael answered him, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered him, "Because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You'll see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." He took that vision that Jacob had, should have been a very familiar story to Nathanael, and he replaced the ladder or the staircase with the Son of Man. Right? You will see angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man. Not meaning I'm going to lie here and they're going to come down and back up and back and they're just going to see this, or I'm going to like stretch up and I'm going to hoist them up. This is not what we're talking about. What was the point? The point of this staircase is the channel, the way in which God has His dealings with humanity. Right? This is the way. Whatever God's doing in the earth, it's happening through this staircase. There at this place. If you can get to this place, you can deal with God. If you can get to this place, God can help you. Jesus is saying, look, you believe because I said, I saw you under the fig tree. You're going to see greater things than that. That was a miracle. It's a little bit mysterious to us what that miracle was, this miraculous seeing of Nathanael. But Nathanael knew it. This was miraculous that this man, Jesus, saw that. You are, he says, you're the Messiah. You're the one. You're the Son of God. Well, here, Jesus says, look, you believe because of that, you're going to see heaven opened and angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man. Everything that God does in the world is going to be through me. You're going to come to the place, Nathanael. Think of that. Of being a disciple, and here you are, Nathanael, that Jesus is telling you, you're going to see such things as you witness my life and my ministry, that you're going to come to the place where you're convinced heaven has been opened up and God is blessing the world and people are having access to the Father. And it's all happening because of this man specifically. He's the one. He's the ladder. He's the staircase. He's our way to God. He's God's way to us. He's what we need. He's the only place we can go. This is the spot. That's what Jesus means by calling Himself the staircase or the ladder in this sense. He's the way to get to God. Elsewhere He says it in other terms very plainly. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but through me. So that's the kind of statement. This is what this stairway is meant to represent to Jacob as well. This is the place where you have access to God. Now, what else does he say? So there's the staircase. Then there is, behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Exclamation point, my translation has, rightly so. The angelic hosts are ascending and descending, which indicates what? Well, they're ascending. They have access to heaven. Here are beings who have free access to heaven and to God. But also they're descending, which means they're here present on the earth. They're not just heavenly beings that can do things in heaven where God is. They're here, active, engaged, doing things on mission on the earth. They are God's instruments on the earth. Now, later on, why would God show him this picture? Why would he show him the staircase? We talked about that already, what that indicates. Then he shows him the angels, and then the Lord appears and speaks to him. And I think the idea is this. The things that God declares to him, he says, I'll be with you and I'll make sure all these things happen for you. Well, God's not going to be with him like walking around with him in that sense. So when the dream is over and the vision is done, what is Jacob to think about how God is going to do what God said he's going to do? He's going to do it through the angels, generally. Does that make sense? Like he's going to protect him by the angels. Later we find, a couple chapters later, he just walks up and greets a couple angels. I mean, it's very unusual, but it happened again. And so, based upon the later words of God to Jacob, these angels would have communicated, I think, several things to Jacob. First, they are to be in God's charge, accomplishing God's purpose in the earth. They're ascending and descending from heaven. Second, they are tasked then with ensuring the protection of Jacob and the fulfillment of God's promises. As much as in their power and in their charge and their ability to do so, they are to carry out God's word and command in the earth. And God is going to give His word to Jacob that He has certain plans and purposes with Jacob, and He's going to carry him out. And it is these angels who will be given His charge, given command to protect him, to provide for him, to ensure his safety, these sorts of things. This would be surely a great comfort to Jacob once he understands and sees the full vision. Then the last thing we're told he sees, behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father. So he goes on and he announces who he is. But it begins this thing, he sees the Lord. Behold, the Lord stood above it. So they're up in heaven. The angels are ascending and descending upon this stairway, this structure, and they're standing at the top. Heaven has been opened. And what does Jacob see? He sees the Lord. Right? He sees the Lord. This is amazing. He sees the Lord Himself, Yahweh. He sees Yahweh standing above it. The power of God, right? He sees Him there in the heavens. Now, my translation says, and He stood above it and said. Is anyone else in there? Now I have a different thing in my footnote. It says, He stood beside him and said. And behold, the Lord stood beside him and said. But in the text it says the Lord stood above it and said. Does anyone else have beside him in their translation? Maybe everyone's reading from the same translation I am today. Okay. So the word can go either way. The Lord stood there, stood near, stood next to, stood beside. And it's like, what's the reference? Is it the Lord stood beside, they're connected to it, and there He is in heaven, standing above this thing? Or is it, and behold, the Lord, He wasn't there, He actually stood here beside me. I think either way could be consistent. However you interpret it, I think the point remains the same. Here's what I mean. Let's say it means He stood beside me. Then what you would have, I think, would be something like this, though it's not explicitly stated. He sees this staircase. He follows this thing. While he's looking, he's seeing angels ascending and descending. He gets up there. Heaven is opened, and there he sees the Lord. But behold, the Lord stands come here next to him. He's here beside him and speaking to him to assure him, I'll be with you, as he does later. Right? So he sees it. He sees what's happening, what all this means, and then the Lord is just there beside him. Or the Lord is there in heaven, And the voice comes and speaks to him and says, I'll be with you. Either way, the same thing is implied. Both the majesty of God Himself and then God's promise to be with him and to protect him and to provide for him. Both things are there. It's just kind of a matter of which one. I mean, the word can go either way. And I see some people that say, no, it's definitely in heaven, because that would be a fitting conclusion to see the majesty of God in all of this. Then God turns right around and assures him of His personal connection and how much He'll be with him, and I'll never leave you until all is accomplished. That sounds very personal. That seems like it would be more fitting to have God not just far off there in heaven, but to come, this one who you would have expected to be up there in heaven, to be in surprise, He's right here next to me. He took His place here with me to encourage me. Both are powerful, and I think both are actually the intended effects of the vision. He's supposed to both see a view of the majesty of God with this amazing structure and the angels and all of their work and heaven being opened up. He's supposed to see that. And whether God is there or God is here, he's supposed to fall on his knees and have some sense of fear at the majesty and the greatness of God. But he's also supposed to take personal comfort at the words of God, that He's God's promise to be with him, that He's going to give His angels charge over him to protect him and provide for him, and God's personal interest and care in him specifically. Both things are supposed to happen as a result of this dream. And that it's just a matter of which one, where God is in terms of maybe which one's emphasized first or second. It doesn't really matter to me. So I don't quibble with people about where we're going to place God in this vision. He's next to the ladder up there in heaven, or He's next to Jacob down here in the earth. Either way, it's the same powerful God expressing the same personal care. Does that make sense? So, not a whole lot's lost, but I don't want to say that because we don't know where God may have appeared, that somehow that loses all of its power to you. Wherever He appears, it's a great statement of His majesty and His personal care. Both of those things we want to get as a result of this vision, because they were meant to be given to Jacob. Now, that is all just the significance of the setting of the dream, the things that he sees in the dream. But God hasn't spoken yet. So let's consider this. So now the significance of the words of the Lord. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Now this is God's mishmash of His various promises to Abraham. He's made all sorts of promises, and almost every one of them finds a quotation in this section. I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. You would think it would be switched, wouldn't it? I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, your father, because Isaac was his father, not Abraham. Abraham's his grandfather. Isaac was his father. But he says, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. What is Isaac, his brother? I mean, Isaac's his father. Why go to Abraham? Jump to Abraham to show immediately, yes, you are in fact getting the promises of Abraham. Right? The God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. Something promised to Abraham. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth. Remember that from, was it Genesis 15? Or no, 13, Genesis 13. Also from Genesis 13, I'll just read from Genesis 13. God says to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, God says to Abram, lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward, for all the land that you see I will give to you and to your offspring forever. And here we're told, your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. Right? Then we read from Genesis chapter 22, after the sacrifice of the attempted sacrifice, the willing sacrifice of Isaac. We read that God, it says, in you and in your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Here we read, and in you and in your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. All these things are kind of brought together. Then he says, behold, I'm with you, and I'll keep you wherever you go. What does that mean, to keep him? To be his keeper, to protect him, to provide for him, to ensure his safety, to look out for him, to do for him all the things that Cain failed to do for Abel. Am I my brother's keeper? Right? I don't have to look after him and make sure he's all right. It's not my job. That's what Cain said after he murdered him. God says, I will keep you. Wherever it is that you go, I'll keep you. You don't have to be here. Wherever it is you're going, I will keep you. And I will bring you back even to this specific land, because I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Now, you might read that and say, well, you mean he's saying he's going to be with him and do all these things until this, and then after that all bets are off. That's not the way it is. Have you ever had a dear friend promise you something? You say, they promise you to do some certain thing, you think, I don't know, are you sure? And they say, listen, I will stay with you until it happens. You don't think, oh, well, then you're just going to leave me afterwards. I see how it is. You understand that they are committed to you no matter what. They will, as unlikely as what they've just promised seems to be, they are committed to you. And they will not leave your side. Not only are they not going to just not abandon you, they're going to be with you by your side to see this thing through all the way to the end and rejoice with you when it comes to pass. They mean to bring this good thing to you no matter what. And this is the kind of commitment that God gives him. And so God just conscripts him. He says, look, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I'm going to give you this land, and I'm going to give it to your offspring. And I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, and you, and through your offspring, you shall spread abroad to the west, and to the east, to the north, to the south. And then in your offspring, all the families of the earth are going to be blessed. And more than that, listen to this. Behold, I will be with you, and I will keep you everywhere you go, and I'm going to take you. I know you're going far now, but I'm going to take you back right here to this land, because I'm not going to leave until I've done everything I promised. He's just been drafted by the Lord, right? He was like, I was just running. I was going to go over there somewhere else. God says, this is how it's going to go. This is how it's going to be. He promises a number of things. He promises him the land. He promises him offspring, this blessing to all the nations. He promises him his personal presence. He promises him his protection. He promises to return him to this place. There are so many things that are promised to him in this instance. How does Jacob respond? Well, how do you respond to the promises of God to you, beloved? Well, that's the question we ought to be asking ourselves in this sense. How does Jacob respond? Jacob's response, first of all, verses 16 and 17, was full of reverence and awe. Let me just look at this here real quick, just so I want you to see something, that there are three separate things that Jacob does. Look at verse 16. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, right, that's one thing that happens. Then verse 18. So, early in the morning, Jacob took the stone, right, that's the second thing. And then in verse 20, then Jacob made a vow, saying. So three things that he does. He responds in three different ways, right? Does that make sense? You just see three. He wakes up and he says something, then later in the morning he does something specific, and then thirdly he speaks a vow. So he responds just with an exclamation. He wakes up and what does he say? What does he say? He awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So this is his first initial reaction was full of reverence and awe, right? In the vision, think of this, he had a vision of the staircase, which would be like this access, this way to get to God. And then from that were the angels of God. and then was God himself. And listen to how, right? And then God speaks these promises to him. And then he responds and he says, what is the first thing he wakes up? Surely the Lord is in this place. He talks about God first. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. Right, this is where the angels have been. And this is the gate of heaven. So it goes back in the opposite order. So again, you have kind of the gate of heaven, or the stairway to get to heaven. Then you have the angels who exist with God. And then you have God himself. And then now when he responds, he says, God is in this place. This is the house where God is. And this is the gateway to get to heaven. This is the gate of heaven. Think of these words. He awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like maybe you were the last one to learn something? Right? Maybe in a way, or like, I know it's happened because I've seen it happen in our meetings. We're in a meeting, and maybe it's time of prayer, and somebody walks in late. It's been me sometimes, it's been you sometimes, it's been all of us sometimes. They walk in, it's like, oh, shh, they're praying, shoot. And you just quiet. Kids are talking as they're coming in, shh, stop talking, right? And it's just, because you know, like you've walked in a way that's maybe far too casual for this. You didn't realize, had you known, you wouldn't have come in. Or you walk into there's some event happening somewhere, and you walk in, and you think you're walking into the back, and you're walking in the front, and all eyes are on you or something. Like it's very awkward. You didn't mean for it to be this way. And here he says, look, surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. I came to this little place on the hillside, this certain place where people had these stones set up, and I started rearranging things and moving stuff all around. I laid down to sleep, and I didn't have any idea that God was here. What was I doing? It's far too casual. He's just kind of kicking himself like, you dummy, what are you doing? God was like right here, and you didn't even know it. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid. Well, why would he be afraid? This is so strange. I mean, God has just made him all these promises. What's to be afraid of? I mean, most of us, we read our Bibles and we think, oh, God made me that promise. That's wonderful. Jacob hears these words and he's fearful. Because don't lose both things here. Again, yes, there are all the promises that God makes him. But there's this vision of heaven being opened up and the angels of God ascending and descending. He's in a place that is terrifying to be. It's like Moses there, take your sandals off your feet, you're on holy ground. It's like Isaiah. He sees the Lord, he says, I'm undone. I'm a man of unclean lips. I come from a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. What am I going to do? We don't have any sense generally as people of what it is to come face to face with your Maker, with God himself. He's got a vision of this, and he's afraid. He's terribly afraid. His immediate response, he doesn't wake up and say, well, I'm glad he's on my side. He wakes up and says, surely God was in this place, and I didn't know it, and he's terrified. He was afraid, it says. He was afraid. And said, how awesome is this place? How terrible, how terrible, how terrifying is this place? How much should this place strike fear in the hearts of those who pass by? This is a frightening place. Think of this. I mean, God appears to him, and we all know the story. God means to do good to Jacob. Jacob didn't know that necessarily. Jacob was not the kind of guy who would have wanted an encounter with God. Right? I mean, he's not deserving of too much. He's just committed one of the worst sins we've read about until now in Genesis. He's on the run for his life. He's been lying to everyone he knows. He's always looking out for number one, and he comes face to face with God. And he's greatly afraid, it says. He was afraid. This place is terrifying. This is awesome. How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So he's stunned. He's shocked. And then it begins in silence. We don't read about it in the next couple of verses. But in between verses 17 and 18, what must he do? He must be pondering the things that God has said, Think of what could it mean that God himself has appeared to him, surely he has, and then spoken to him these things. What does he do? So, early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on the top of it. And he called the name of that place Bethel, because the name of the city was Luz at the first. It means house of God. He takes this stone and he sets it up in a way, maybe on the ground itself or maybe on top of other stones, to set it up in some way as some fresh new altar. This is here. He sets it up to stand out apart from everything else, and he anoints the top of it with oil and calls the name of that place Bethel. What does he do? He worships God in the way that he knows how. God in his majesty has appeared to him, and God in his grace has declared to him these purposes for him, and he responds with reverence, with awe, but here with worship. He says, well, if this has happened to me, you don't have this kind of experience and just go about your day and go on. You mark this down. You say, this thing happened to me. God met me there. You don't want to forget that place. It's the kind of thing, if you ever walk by there again, you would say, I want to go to this place. Right? I grew up in Lake St. Louis, moved to Wentzville for the last 2 years. Every time we pass through Lake St. Louis, what do I do with my kids? What do? We drive by the old house. That's where I used to live. That's where this happened. We're driving through, like, oh, I remember this one time. All these places, these things happen. I want to mark them out. They don't care about most of it. Some of it they do. But I care. It matters to me. Right? My parents did the same thing. It's just what you do. This is the kind of thing you mark, because you don't want to forget this one. You mark it out. Right? He worships. He establishes something. His life is forever changed. He's become a worshiper of God. And he called the name of that place the house of God, Bethel. But the name of the city was Luz at the first. That's inconsequential. That doesn't even matter to us. Like Moses is just saying, there was a city there that had this name Luz, but all of that pales in comparison to the greatness of this place and why it has this name now. Think of that. There was a city there by the name of Luz. It's a weird name for a city, but we don't use that language, so maybe it's just fine. The name of the city of Luz. And there is in Luz a number of people who have lived there. It's an establishment. It's been there maybe for 100 years, maybe 50 years, maybe 300 years, maybe 1,000 years. This city of Luz, this establishment that's been there. And the people that live there, they don't know which God to serve. They have all these false gods that they have, and they have this little place out there where they've been sacrificing. And it doesn't really have a name. It's just the place. It's where they go. You know, it's not the place of any particular God, because they don't know which one to serve, and it doesn't really matter anyway. None of them really done anything for them. They just keep trying to figure this out, how to serve these gods in the right way to get what they need and keep their children safe and to keep the other armies away and this kind of thing. That's all it's there for. And this man Jacob shows up, and God shows up. The real, true God shows up, and he names it, this is not just a place, this is the house of God, Bethel. And it becomes in the course of time that Luz is not even anything. The whole place becomes called Bethel. This is amazing. And it's fitting. The most significant thing that ever happened there was that God appeared here. Not that these people had built a city. I mean, you might think, well, they've got something here. They've built their lives here. They've been here for multiple generations. They've named it Luz. It'll be Luz forever. No, God appeared to this guy out there, and from now on, the most significant thing that ever happened at this place is that God showed up to this old man named Jacob and changed his life and saved him forever. So now the third way that Jacob responds is what? He makes a vow. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat, and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone, which I have set up for a pillar, shall be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will give a full tenth to you. Now, this is not just a kind of a response to say, well, we'll see, the verdict's out, whether God's going to do anything or not. It is, in a sense, a commitment to God. He's committed. He's going to, okay, God's saying He's going to do this, then I'm going to go with God and we'll see what happens. It is something of a test, though, right? If God does this, if you've appeared to me, you've done these, you've promised to do these things. If you actually do these things, and you are with me to the end, then when we get back here, I will come to this place, and I will worship you here in this place, and I will give you a full tenth of all that you've given to me. Right? And this shall be, this pillar here, it won't just be a pillar. I will establish this place. This will be God's house. This will be a place where you are worshiped by me. And that's what he says. Right? So in a sense, it's conditional. I make a vow. God, okay, if you do what you say you're going to do, then I will do this. I will worship you here in this place. There's this phrase there, right after it says then. It says, then the Lord shall be my God. And there's a sense, right? I mean, until now, Jacob has not been serving the Lord. God has not been his God. But now that God has appeared to him, and there's no doubt as to who the true God is and what's happening, and God has chosen him, and God has promised to him, it's as though Jacob is saying, all right, God, you and me. We're going to go out here together and I'll venture out on you, and you're going to protect me, and I'm going to look to you, and if I get back here, then there'll be no mistake about it. You're my God. He doesn't mean to say, like, I'm going to go out and I'm looking for any God who might help me all along the way, and if it just so happens that I get back here and I'm still safe, then I'll agree to serve you. He's depending on God's protection and provision all the way. And he's just saying, God, if you make, okay, I'll venture out on you. And if you make good on all that you're going to need to do for me, then when we get back here, I'm going to honor you in the way that you would deserve to be honored. Does this make sense? So it's like until now, God hasn't been his God. But now he's going to be. And if God, for this long trip, this however long he's away, does in fact do all that God said he would do, then mark it down. Jacob will make sure that he honors God and worships him in this place. Specifically, he will come back to this place and remember it, build an altar to God, and will do something he's never done before. He will make a full tithe to God of all that God has given him to make sure God receives the honor for it. And so this is where he's at. He will honor God here in this place as a sure and certain place that God had met with him and had committed to him and had cared for him and had become his God here in this place. Now, that's the text. Now, there's some things I want to say about it just by way of application. I think it's pretty easy to understand what happens here and what's going on. First of all, I said there were 4 areas of application. The first was confidence in God. One of the things that this dream was meant to instill in Jacob was a confidence, right? That he had a helper. When he went out there, when Laban was double-crossing him and changing his wages and things, he didn't need to go out and take from Laban the same way he took and scheme and connive and take from people all the ways he was doing before. He didn't need to do that. He could leave it to God. And he did. He did. I mean, when we read about Laban, it's like Laban was the way that Jacob was to Esau is the way Laban is to Jacob. Right? Always just trying to take advantage and change things and be so opportunistic and work things out. I mean, can you imagine how Jacob felt when he woke up and it was Leah? I mean, he's thinking, God, you were going to protect me. You were going to watch out for me. And of course, the Lord does. It doesn't mean he's not going to have conflict. It doesn't mean people aren't going to try to manipulate the situation and mistreat him, but he's going to have the help of God. And at the end of those 20 years, he comes back and he said, look what God has done for me. He is wealthy. Laban, in fact, feels like he's stolen everything from Laban, and Jacob had nothing to do with it. Jacob just served him faithfully. So this dream was meant to give Jacob confidence so that he could go, and when Laban would mistreat him, he wouldn't have to go and respond in kind. He could just trust God to do what God said he would do, and he does. And so this revelation of God's commitment to him instilled in him great confidence, right? Now that confidence surely only grew as he continued to see God work things out for him in greater and greater ways. But initially, it's just the words that he has to go on. God promised. He's been faithful to Abraham. He was pretty faithful to Isaac. And now he's promised to do these things for me. He's revealed himself to me. He's promised to do that. I'm going to trust him. And he goes out trusting the Lord. And I just say we kind of have the same thing, right? I mean, we can say, you could look at whatever your prospects are for the future and say, well, what do I have? Well, God promised me, right? He promised. Just like he promised Jacob here to be with him. And we could read, and I'll just read there. I mean, Matthew 28, of course, very familiar. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. Right? I'm with you. We have the same, God will be with us. In what way? Well, to keep us, to protect us, to do all, to fulfill all the good purposes He's committed to for us. He's with us. We have the help of God. That makes a difference when we run into obstacles, challenges, temptations, people who are contrary to us. It matters. It's easy to give place to the wrath of God when you know God means to execute wrath. It's easy to trust God with those who do you wrong when you know that God's looking out for you. Someone steals something from you and say, look, I don't need to go fight for that thing. God's going to provide. He's provided so far. He gave it to me to begin with. He can give me another one if I need it. He can give me this thing back. Whatever it may be, I'm looking to God. People don't act this way. Little kids, and they get on a playground and they have some kind of a fight, right? The kids who just start fighting, most kids, they just start fighting against each other. But then there's that one kid whose older brother is at the playground. And what does he do? If he's smart, what does he do? What does that kid do? He stops, he runs off, and he goes, tells the older brother. The older brother comes in and says, what's going on? Right? This is what happens. We all know this from experience. We see this happen all the time. Right? This is what happens. And this is the way it is for us as believers. Like, something happens, there's some disagreement, some argument. Are we just going to start fighting or quarreling? We're going to say, stop that and just go tell our Father. Go tell our older brother, Jesus, who cares for us, what's happened, and let Him deal with it. Right? This is the way it is. This is the way Jacob could be with God because of God had promised these things on the front end. He can go and he can see Laban doing these things, and he cannot quarrel and fight with Laban about it. He can just trust that God will do these things for him. And God does. This instills great confidence in us, in God, just as it did for Jacob. So what should we do, right? This is how we ought to respond. When we receive these promises from God, it should create in us great confidence. Like we all know this, right? If we have these promises from God and we believe them, then we will have the confidence necessary at these times. Now, if we don't put our trust in them, we just, okay, yeah, God said those things, but we're still out here all trying to work it out for ourselves. It's like that little kid who goes out and he gets in the fight and he gets beat up and comes back and his older brother says, what happened? He says, I got in a fight. Well, why didn't you come get me? I would have helped you. Oh, I don't know. I just thought I'd do it myself. Well, that's not working out very well. Like, you need to come to me. I was right. You knew I was here. You knew I'd help you. This is the way it is, believer. The Lord tells us, you have not because you ask not, right? Come to me. The other application is just in terms of worship. He sees this staircase and the angels, and he sees the Lord, and he responds with worship. With reverence, with awe, fear, worship, praise. He's moved to respond. And I want to say this, worship is action. Worship is action. Like, what does he do? he sets up this thing to remember this forever. And he says, if you bring me back, I'm going to worship you here in this place. I'm going to establish something here in your name where you can be honored. I'm going to tithe the full tenth of everything I have. Like you don't... I know we talk about singing songs to the Lord in worship, and that is a form of worship. We're praising Him as He ought to be praised. But worship, like, it's more than just that. It's not just, it's obedience. It's not just obedience. Worship is action. I want to think of it this way. You might think of what He's going to do, what He's promising to do, as something like this. Think about some person retires from where they've worked for 20, 30 years, and they've been a good employee, a faithful friend to all those people. What do? They throw like a retirement banquet in their honor, right? All these people get together, they serve all the food, they have all the stuff, and the whole occasion is what? To thank this person for their service, to honor them for the kind of person that they are, to praise them, right? Now you wouldn't say the praising or just the mouthing of the words is all that was necessary. It was like actually the whole ordeal, the whole setting up and the meal and the preparing and the invitations and the planning and all that took place and was all part of the honor that was meant to be bestowed. The extreme trouble that everyone went to to honor this person was all part of the worship. This is what I mean. Worship is action. Part of the worship will be, if you come, I'll give a full tenth of everything to you. It was costly. I'll give you tenth of everything to honor you as you're the one from whom all this comes. You're greater than I. I didn't establish all this myself, but you did. Worship is action. He's moved to worship. He has this encounter with God, and it changed him. It changed the nature of the way he thought about God. It changed the way he thought about himself. It changed the way he thought about that place. Right? I mean, there are places, I know we don't have to go to a place to worship God much the same way that many people back then felt that they did. But there are places, physical places, I can remember God met me in special ways. It's this place or that place. And those places even are still special to me. Like I return to those places, not expecting to, now I'm going to deal with God here, but just in a sense almost to go back and just remember what happened there. That still happens. There's something of that here for Jacob. He's moved to worship God. And we ourselves, we got to have the same sort of response, right? We receive the promises of God. We get some glimpse of God and His character and what He's like and His majesty. We ought to be moved to new levels of worship every time. It's not just, oh, I didn't know that before. Okay, you've learned something about God. What changes now about the way you worship and serve God? Things ought to be different. Every time you learn something new about God, it informs this picture of who He is. He's greater than you thought He was. He's more kind than you thought He was. He's more merciful, more loving, more patient, more powerful. He's more than you thought. Mark those things down. Make some determination. I did not know this about God the way I do now. As a result of this, I need to worship God differently. I need to do this in a way I've never done it before. What's going to change specifically? What's the difference now? Right? There were specific changes for Jacob in his worship of God. Well, what else? He responds with commitment. He makes a vow. I'm not commending us and suggesting to you the practice of making vows to God, but typically, if you go through the Old Testament, typically these vows were made to God in a conditional sense. Just like we all know people do the same thing. We talk about foxhole conversions. Lord, if you'll get me through this, then I'm going to do this for you. Right? People do this all the time to God, which is one of the reasons in the Old Testament and with the law of Moses, people are commanded again and again, don't forget to repay your vows to the Lord. Don't forget. Because it's easy to forget, right? The guy's in the foxhole and they're getting shelled, and this is what we mean. He's praying, God, if you'll get me out of this, I'll serve you my whole life. And then the shelling stops. And they go right back to their cussing and laughing and everything else. And they forget God entirely. They just pray, Lord, if you would. I'm a sinner. I don't deserve anything from you. But if you would please just do this for me, I'll give my whole life to you. And God gets them out of it and they say, forget that. What a dishonor. It's incredible. Christians don't respond to God that way. Right? Christian in their desperation says, God, help. And God responds. And they should respond to God with great commitment. Right? He makes a vow. If you're promising me to do these things for me, and if, I can't believe it, but if you will do those things, you will be my God. And I will establish this place here as a house of worship for you. And I will, whatever it is you've given me, I will give I won't hold anything back. I will honor you with all of it. I will give you a full tenth of all that you've provided for me. That's how a believer responds to God. And he does it. Jacob did it. This is how we respond, with commitment. Right? We see some new vision of God. We hear the promises of God. We recount His faithfulness. How do you respond? With commitment. Greater levels of commitment. I mean, God's not just interested in showering us with blessings and good experiences and teaching us things. He's interested in making us holy, as we should have been at the beginning. Remember when God made all the heavens and the earth, and the last thing He made, the crowning jewel of His creation, was man, made in His image to rule in the world. And He set it all apart as holy unto Himself, everything oriented to Him. Humanity, worshiping God first and foremost, all out for the Lord, doing His will in the world. And then man rebels. When God turns to redeem man, it's not just to redeem him and take that man who wants nothing to do with God and trapping him in heaven where he's with God against his will. God means to change the man's heart and make him wholly devoted to the Lord again. So that the man loves the Lord with all of his heart and all of his mind and all of his strength and all of his will. Right? He's all out for God. God means in these promises to us, in His commitment to us, in His providence where He works things out for us and proves Himself, He means to earn your trust, to gain your heart's affections, to gain your desires, so that you can say with the psalmist, you have nothing. What do you desire in heaven? And what do you have on earth besides God? Nothing. It's all about Him. Right? This commitment. We're going for God. Let the world have these things. They're nice. I see that. That's comfortable. I'd like to have it. But I want God. That's got to be a desire we have. That's got to be our commitment. I mean, Jesus says, if you've not sold everything, or if you've not left everything for me, you can't even be my disciple. This is what it is foundationally, denying yourself that you might have God. This level of commitment. It increases, right? I mean, you become... It's just like with marriage, right? You say for better or for worse, till death do us part. And you mean that. But you don't have a clue how much you're going to have to mean it and stand by it to make the marriage work long term. Right? Like you think, I know what I'm doing. Like you look at that person you're going to marry and you think, of course I would accept them. They're wonderful. Everything about them is lovely. Right? Nothing but good things in my future when I marry this person. It's going to be just wonderful. For better or for worse. But, you know, that's not likely because of who you are and how in love we are. And then a little time goes by and you start to get tested for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer. And you think, what did I say? Right? I mean, you don't feel that way, but you begin to realize that that promising that person you would do this even in those situations mattered, because those situations would come up. And there'd be this temptation to be less than what you should be to them in those instances, right? And you would fail them, and they would fail you. You'd have to forgive them. It wouldn't always just be better, right? There's sometimes, shocker, right, where the relationship between husband and wife is worse than it was on the wedding day. Yeah, that happens. It gets better than that and it gets worse than that. It gets both. This is the reality, but you're committed, right? This is what we mean. What's your commitment to the Lord? He has given this. What does God get out of this? Put it this way. What does God get out of appearing in this dream and saying these words? What does God get out of it? I mean, because He was going to do these things for Jacob. What He gets is a worshiper. He gets a man committed to His name and His honor. That's what He gets. That's what God was after. He wanted to take Jacob and give him confidence that he could trust God and give him a sense of who God was and the greatness of His power. And then also receive something from Jacob. He wanted Jacob to be turned into a person who would say, if you do, I will lean on you, and if you will do these things for me, you are my God forever. That's what he wanted. He wanted a heart that would venture out on God, that would look at his life situations and say, how is God going to deal with these things that I'm facing? And then when God provided for him, to say, yep, God did it, and I'm going to give God the honor. That's what he wanted, and that's exactly what he got. Jacob was transformed in an instant. In an instant. Which brings me to the last application, and that is just in terms of evangelism. When you think about sharing the gospel with people, or put it this way, when you think about trying to win people over for the Lord, there are many people who will suggest to you a specific, certain way. This is how you share Christ with other people. You talk about these things. There are these steps. There's this Roman road, maybe it is, which is just Scripture. Or there's these 4 spiritual laws. Or there's this or that. Or there's the way that I take them to the law, and then I share them the gospel, or whatever. However it is, there's everybody, all these evangelists and these groups have their kind of way of doing it, right? And they say, this is how you do it. This is not the way it is. Where did God declare to Jacob about his sin? Show me that verse. Somebody? He didn't. Where did God, we read that Jacob responded and says, I'm going to tithe the full tenth to you. So probably he wasn't tithing. Probably God talked to him about that. Let me think. No, he didn't. He didn't do that either. Well, he's been this liar. If you or I would talk to Jacob, one of the things we would probably say is, this guy is sinning, and his conscience isn't bothered at all. Somebody needs to talk to him about he needs to see the enormity of his sin and the gravity of it, and then maybe he'll humble himself and seek God. That's not a bad idea. Many people come to God that way. That is not at all what God did with Jacob. He just showed God how great He was. Showed Jacob how great God is. And He promised him, I mean to do you good. And Jacob was converted in a moment to be a worshiper of God. Like this, it's different things for different people, right? There's some people, it's a vision of the holiness of God and its complete separation. And what it does is that vision of God, it shatters all their wrong ideas about God as being just kind of, the man upstairs or, whatever. And they realize, wait a minute, I'm a creature with a Creator, and I need to worship and bow to this one, and these are His words, and I'm going to follow Him. And they're converted like that. Other people, it's some narrative from the gospel, some story of Jesus' compassion on some person, and they're moved, and they see themselves in that story, and they say, I've needed this all my life. I've never known anyone could be this way, let alone God is this way. I'm going to give myself to Him, no questions asked. And they just throw themselves upon His mercy. And they figure out the gospel later, but they are committed to follow this one. It happens. Other people, it's the awareness of their sins. They've been proud and kind of excused and justified themselves all their life, and suddenly they realize there's nowhere to hide. God has seen it all, and they have to deal with God. And then they hear and they're terrified, and then they hear about this gospel offer, and they believe, and they're joyfully saved. There are a dozen other variations of these things. God saves individuals, right? He meets us where we are, how we are, with what knowledge we have, and He saves. And He does that here. And so all I mean in terms of the application for evangelism is don't have a system, I just kind of do this with everybody. Like, deal with people, right? The person you're dealing with where is their ignorance? Where are their wrong ideas of God? Start there. What are their personal hang-ups? What are the problems in their life? What are they dealing with? Start there and show God as the answer to these things. Right? Now, we don't mean just talk to people about their felt needs. Right? Just whatever they think they need, show how God can do that for them. But that's not what we mean. I mean talk to them, deal with them at their point of need. And ask God to show you what that is. You may not know for a while. They might know exactly what their point of need is. Or they might not know at all. God does. He's more than able to save them. Again, it's not always a picture of our sin which converts us. Often it's the beauty of the Lord, or the kind intention of His purpose, or the greatness of His offer. There are so many different things that cause people to turn to God and to love God. For Jacob, it was that God would, of His own accord, pass on to him all the promises of Abraham and Isaac. That He would commit Himself to him. That the living God who rules all things would say, "You're my guy." He didn't deserve it at all. Like, there was nothing that Jacob did to elevate himself above anyone else. And yet God chose him, set him apart, promised to bless the whole world through his descendants. And Jacob responded. Right? I mean, it's like you can picture the gospel offer going out to somebody and saying, "Listen, do you understand that Christ died for you in such a way that, like, if you would just trust Him, He would forgive your sins. You would find that you've been made new and you're totally different. Some of those same struggles you have right now would just fall away. Others would be hard fought, but you would have resources to fight that you've never had before. He'll send you His comforter. This Bible that you don't understand, He'll teach it to you. Your eyes will be open. You'll understand things you've never understood. He'll listen to your prayer and answer your prayer. He'll feed you. He'll clothe you. He'll provide for you. He'll protect you. He'll save you from hell, and He'll bring you to be with Him forever, for all eternity. He'll give you a new body that will never perish, that will never grow ill. You'll be with God forever in complete joy and happiness. They might hear that and think, whatever. Or you might be talking to someone who hears that and they're just welling up with tears. They say, "This can be mine? How? Explain to me. What do I need to believe?" And they just believe, and they're made a follower of Christ just like that. This is the way it is. There's no one way that this happens. The Lord Himself is a supreme example of this, right? He deals with everybody we see Him encounter in the Gospels. He deals with them all differently. He makes followers of them all, but He does it differently for every one. Well, I suppose that's all the application I have. These sorts of encounters with God, these things when we see God afresh or we realize the promises of God in new ways, ought to instill in us greater confidence in God. It ought to change and alter our worship forever. It ought to create in us greater commitment for the Lord. And seeing the way the Lord deals with people in these ways ought to inform the way we evangelize and share Christ with others. There's not some one certain way that they have to come to Christ. Now, there's only one way to God, and that is through Christ. They have to come through the gospel. They're never going to get to God and have peace with God apart from Christ. But how do you get them to Christ? Well, there's all kinds of ways that we see that happen. That someone becomes a willing disciple and listener and hearer of the words of Jesus. Once they begin hearing those words, they've got to understand them right. They've got to understand and know the gospel that they might have peace with God. Well, Are there questions or comments on any of these things we've discussed today?